What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie here today to cross my arms for this Frosty feature. Today we have our final member that we're going to go over on our Night Stalker team. The one the community voted on, Man-Thing. So if you haven't been to this before, what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force. And I am your guide through the pages. So with that, let's get started. According to Scopely, this is a first in Frosty features. This is like 109, I think, 110, something like that. And we've never had a situation where Scopely has released two separate biographical things on the same character. So I'm gonna read them both, and we're gonna rate them at the end as one of the feature. So, Man-Thing. Whoever knows, fear burns at the touch of the Man-Thing! Once a scientist attempting to recreate the super soldier serum that gave birth to Captain America, Ted Sallis was attacked by an AIM agent trying to steal his secrets. Fleeing his attackers and exposed to his serum, Ted stumbled into the swampy nexus of all realities, its power transforming him into a mindless force for good, the plant-based protector of the innocent, the macabre Man-Thing. That's a fun one. That's a fun one. It's a fun description. Description number 2. Dr. Ted Sallis, a brilliant biochemist, was working on a secret super soldier serum deep in the Florida Everglades when a betrayal led to his tragic transformation. Fleeing from those who sought to steal his work, Sallis injected himself with the serum and crashed into this swamp, where the mystical forces fused him with the environment, turning him into the monstrous Man-Thing. Now a creature of muck and vegetation, Man-Thing possesses superhuman strength, regenerative abilities, and the power to burn those who feel fear with his corrosive touch. As a guardian of the nexus of all realities, Man-Thing has clashed with Marvel heroes like Spider-Man and the Hulk, becoming a mysterious and fearsome protector of the mystical swamp. We will rate this at the end of the feature. That is Man-Thing. Name, Dr. Theodore Sallis. Ted, if you're his friend. First appearance, Savage Tales, number 1, 1971. This is a black and white comic, and it's got a lot of really cool stuff in it. The Nexus of Reality bit is not in there yet. That comes a little bit later in Adventures into Fear. Powers and abilities. Holy crap. So I'm a big fan of Man-Thing. Man-Thing is this, like, crazy support character, and his powers greatly vary based on who is writing him. Like, he's one of the biggest characters that is a perfect example of that. So, in baseline, superhuman in every way, super strong, super fast, super reflexive, whatever. All that stuff counts. Chlorokinesis. He can control plants around. Think Poison Ivy for my people that are vaguely familiar with the Batman Rogues Gallery. He can control plants and kind of use them to his bidding. Magic. So he very much is rooted in the mystic arts, but he's not consciously controlling them like Doctor Strange, right? He is magic, right? Magic has formed him into this being. He is a creature of magic, right? So with the magic, massive teleportation powers. He's used as a teleporter by a lot of the different teams that he's associated with. He teaches at Strange Academy, which I love. The Strange Academy books, they're amazing. And then also he has things like flight, or his insane durability, where he's made up of this plant matter, and since he can control plants, his malleability, or like his actual being, is sort of like temporary, and he can kind of control it at will, like being able to maybe like remove arms and still control them, or if somebody cuts his arm off, he can regenerate it immediately, or somebody stabs through him, he can just harden the plants around whatever stabbed through him and take away the weapon. And with that, he has no exact vulnerability spots. He also has this emotional touch that is brought up in the blog post. This is really only in the original Man-Thing. He has it a little bit in things like Adventures of Fear, but very much has he moved away from this power. But what it is he doesn't exactly have a central brain, so he reacts to emotions, and negative emotions cause him to want to go fix the negative emotions. So things like fear or anger, he responds with fear or anger. and he touches them and he covers them in sulfuric acid and burns them, or he can put a numbing powdery bubble agent thing that will make it go away. And if they piss him off, he can flip it back to being sulfuric acid, which is super exciting. So Man-Thing's got a lot of powers, and he's very, very strong. Aliases, no duel. The different websites you can go to will say all these different things. Here's the thing. An alias is something that you go by. After Ted Sallis becomes Man-Thing, he doesn't even go by Man-Thing. He's no longer a he's an it. And it is a plant, right? So honestly, there's not a man. So Man-Thing is also what like Stan Lee would use for any like kind of monstrosity that was made in the comics for a long period of time. So this stuck with him because the character got kind of popular. But at the end of the day, he doesn't even really have a name. Everyone just refers to him as Man-Thing, and he kind of picks it up. But he has no preference of name whatsoever because his consciousness is not that of one that cares about names. It's kind of, let's say he's beyond names, right? So my argument is that he actually does not go by anything other than Man-Thing because he doesn't go by anything. He just is. He exists, right? And if we think about this in the Marvel cosmological situation, there's a lot of implications here, right? Because when you get to things like the Living Tribunal and things that are really high up on the cosmology scale, oftentimes they have just this huge list of names, and it's just because that's how people perceive them. Man-Thing is like that if nobody perceived him, right? Because the other thing about Man-Thing, out of all the superheroes, supervillains, and things like that in the Marvel Universe, the public aren't necessarily privy to the fact that Man-Thing exists. He skirts by unnoticed for a very specific reason. Affiliations. He has a lot of affiliations. He kind of, very much from my perspective, I'm a big Doctor Strange reader, so from my perspective, Doctor Strange just kind of plucks him out and puts him in teams. But usually there's a witch or a warlock or a wizard or something that comes and grabs Man-Thing and takes him somewhere else, and all of a sudden he's part of a team. He's just there and he's reacting, right? So affiliations: Midnight Suns, Avengers, Legion of Monsters, S.H.I.E.L.D. For the most part, and this is a big thing to note about Man-Thing, he has no personality. He is a plant, right? He's reacting to what's around him. He doesn't talk. There are some story arcs where he talks. There's some story arcs where Ted Sallis gets separated from Man-Thing, but for the most part, and he's not like the Hulk where he can transform back and forth. It is just it, and it is what it is, right? So with that, even though he's been around since 1971, they're actually, in the grand scheme of things, he doesn't actually have that much you can read about him, right? Which is a big thing. Somebody in chat just said Man-Thing versus Swamp Thing. We'll talk about it. Background: Omaha, Nebraska. So originally he's from Nebraska. From there he went to, I believe, Empire State University in New York, and then from there went to the Everglades following Dr. Kirk Connors, the Lizard, which is super cool. Which is how he ends up in the Everglades and becomes the Man-Thing, where he lives and exists and operates at a mystical swamp that serves as the nexus of all realities. Who died? Can't be a superhero, supervillain without somebody dying, and in this case, really nobody died, but I wasn't really. There's a lot of the whole thing with Man-Thing is that essentially he kind of got the tragic story of the Hulk, but he doesn't have the advantage of ever being human, right? He's existing in this form, and everything was sort of taken away from him because it kind of had to be. So for him to become this way, right? And we'll talk about it a lot. We're going to talk about his origin, of course. So, ultimately, he works on a super soldier serum. Another person that was working on something similar to super soldier serum was Dr. Kirk Connors. He was working on a serum that would help regenerate cells. Therefore, he could grow his arm back, and thus becoming the Lizard. He becomes kind of infatuated with that, which is why he goes to the Everglades. And in him going to the Everglades, he starts working on a new project we'll talk about in a bit. And this project leads him to becoming the Man-Thing. So without the loss of Kirk Connors' arm, there's no Man-Thing. Which is kind of cool, too, because, you know, one of my favorite things about things like the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe, things like that, is it's kind of a butterfly effect, right? Like Kirk Connors. When you hear Kirk Connors, you're like, that's Lizard, Spider-Man. He only deals with Spider-Man. He's a big deal with Spider-Man. And then also, we've got this other name that people might recognize. He's in Werewolf by Night. There was a movie that nobody watched back in like 2004, 2005, right? But it's this character that you really can like identify and recognize, and he is there because of this random Spider-Man rogue, which is super cool to me. I love that. Empathic tendencies. So when something comes around the swamp, be it a scared child or an angry foe, ultimately from a lot of Man-Thing's existence is his he's a plant, y'all. So like he is in a swamp, and if there's nothing for him to react to, think about like plants and photosynthesis, right? Wherever the sun is, they lean towards the sun, right? So this dude legitimately will just stand in this swamp, not moving. And then when he feels a reaction or whatever, he feels emotion, he feels whatever, he will go to it. And that's and he doesn't communicate in any sort of normal way. After a while, they kind of shoehorn in him being able to speak a language. And so he has this sort of comprehension where he can understand things. But ultimately, he also doesn't have a centralized brain. His brain cells are spread out through his body, which give him that sort of extra control over everything. But because of that, he doesn't have that centralized kind of speech thing. So for the most part, you don't hear him talk. He really never does until there's a thing where they take Stan Lee's Excelsior thing and they make it into a language. And Excelsior is a universal language that when you speak it, everyone just hears it in their own language. So everyone thinks he's just speaking their language. I think there's an R.L. Stine run of Man-Thing, and I think that's where that comes from. But anyway, ultimately, he responds to emotions specifically, and he operates heavily off of those. His main operation is to exist, protect the nexus of realities, and outside of that, there's no personality, right? So because there's no personality, there can be no character arc. Because there's no character arc, it's very hard to make Man-Thing a protagonist. He very much is a supporting character where people work around him. Man and Swamp Thing. So Swamp Thing is the DC equivalent of Man-Thing, as a lot of people put it. They are very, very different characters. They have a kind of similar design. I wanted to point out that it's very interesting. So Man-Thing comes first. Man-Thing's based on a character called the Heat from the 1940s. So anyway, they're both rip-offs. If one wants to rip off the other, they're both rip-offs of the Heat. But Man-Thing comes first, and in the same year, Swamp Thing comes out. So Man-Thing in May, Swamp Thing in July. And the writers, Jerry Conley, who did Man-Thing, and Sen Green. I can't read my own handwriting. Anyway, the two people, Jerry Conley and Sen, whatever their last name is, I'm a Marvel guy. They actually were roommates while making these characters. So that's kind of an interesting thing because, yeah, they were actually living together when both of these characters were made and came out. So, you know, everybody wants to point out the Marvel versus DC and which one's a ripoff of whatever. Man-Thing came first. They're both ripoffs of the Heap, and both of the writers were living together when they wrote the two characters. So, very interesting point I just wanted to bring up. All right, relationships. In addition to this, I talked earlier about Curt Connors being a good friend. Curt Connors is a good friend of Dr. Ted Sallis. Outside of that, Ellen Brandt, who we will talk about in the origin very much, is Ted's ex-wife. I don't think there was a formal divorce, but Ted sort of stopped existing in any plane. So there's that. Job Burt, which is Ellen was pregnant at the time of the Man-Thing transitioning. So he ends up having a son. He has reality warping powers and is super cool. And then there's Boy Thing, genetic offspring. Ultimately, it's some cells that were taken from Man-Thing and taken away, and he kind of turns into a little Man-Thing. And for some reason, he runs around with Blade for a while, and it's really weird. But it's just a little version of Man-Thing, which is fun. Namely, that's it, because outside of that, he has no personality, right? Curt Connors is really the only additional bit. So notable events. Let's talk about his origin. So, origin. So this is a recap of the origin. It's not from the original Savage Tales, right? So in the origin, Dr. Ted Sallis, he was working on, first he's working on Project Sulfur for the U.S. Army, and what this was one of the attempts. We've talked about it a lot on Frosty Features. A lot of villains, a lot of heroes. They are made because of them trying to recreate the Captain America Super Soldier Serum. Project Sulfur was in place to do just that. And while working on Project Sulfur is when he meets Dr. Kirk Connors, who is working on a regenerative cell thing. So with Project Sulfur, Dr. Ted Sallis creates serum CO2, I think is what it's called. Or is it SO2? SO2. So he creates SO2, which works. So the main point here, he is trying to create a serum. Not only that that is the Super Soldier Serum, but his main goal is to make whoever takes the serum immune to biochemical warfare. So things like like napalm, arsenic, tear gas, things like that have no effect on the individual. So with the cellular regeneration properties of Dr. Connor's situation, Dr. Sallis got very interested in that, and he started talking to him, and then he tried to hire him, but he couldn't, but they started working together anyway because he couldn't get Connors on Project Sulfur, so he just started helping Connors on his own, which in the meantime, he's teaching classes, things like that, and he meets Ellen Brandt, who is a student of his, and they get married, they go on a honeymoon, and they're having a good time. And then he gets kind of obsessed with his work. She feels left out, and eventually S.H.I.E.L.D. takes notice of what he's doing, so they pick him up, and they're like, yo, you're now on Project Gladiator, which is essentially the same thing. He takes his SO2 serum, and he does some revamps on it with the information he's gathered from Dr. Connor's serum. Ultimately, he's got a revised SO2 serum, and he's well on his way to making this work. And before he can test it, whatever, Ellen got really lonely, and she got really mad that after their honeymoon, that it kind of seemed like he didn't care about her anymore. So she went to AIM and was like, yo, this guy's got like a super soldier serum, and I think it's gonna work. You should go do something about it. So AIM shows up with her, obviously, so that there could be a big seed. And AIM shows up, and they're like, hey, we're gonna take this by force. And Sallis is like, nah, bro, I'm hopping in my car. So he's speed storming down the thing and down the road, and he's being chased by a group of AIM agents, and he's not sure what to do, and he accidentally runs off the road, and as his car is approaching a swamp, he shoots himself up with the SO2 serum, hoping, 1, to survive the crash, 2, to survive the swamp, and 3, to be able to apprehend the AIM agents that are following him. He shoots up, and as he's shooting up, he goes into the swamp. The swamp has mystical properties. The way it works in lore is that the swamp was a weak point for the Nexus of for all of realities. It was a weak point in the system, and in hitting that point with the mix of the serum, it created this Nexus of all realities, this portal to the Nexus. That kind of chills there, which is where Man-Thing very much centers around. And so in his transformation from the serum and the mystical properties, he becomes Man-Thing, and he kills all the AIM agents, and Ellen's like, ah, crap, I done messed up, son. And she leaves. She's injured in the process, and her face gets all messed up. And then it kind of all comes back around in Adventures of Fear. But that is essentially how Man-Thing becomes Man-Thing, and how all that stuff sort of first kind of comes around. And then we find out, I want to say it's in Astonishing Tales, I can't remember. There's a group, because the next thing I want to talk about is Adventures into Fear. I brought it up a few times. Really where I really became aware of Man-Thing was Strange Academy, and then I read stuff after that. But there's a little group in there in between where it very much is like people coming to the swamp.
Man.
Thing, reacting to it and stuff. And then we established that there was a weak point. We open up the Nexus of Realities. Now Man-Thing is there to protect the Nexus of Realities. So moving on to Adventures into Fear, what we have is an aspiring witch and her brother, Jennifer and Andrew Cale. They happened upon a magical artifact. Once again, I pointed out the comparison and the use of Doctor Strange in this character. So they come upon the Doom of Zeranu, right? That's how we're going to pretend that's pronounced. And so they want to try it out. Jennifer wants to see what it's like to be a witch. And they're like, oh, this swamp seems pretty creepy and maybe it has some mystical properties. Let's go do a magic thing there and see what happens. So they use the Tome of Zeranu, and they go and they perform this little ritual at the swamp, and they think nothing happens. They're like, well, that was fun. Oh well. And so they close the book, turn around, and walk on home. And as they're walking home, we see a portal open up, and Thog, the Nether Spawn, comes out, which is this devil-looking chap over here. And he comes out, and he's like, I'm angry, and I'm the Nether Spawn, so I'm gonna kill everybody on the planet. And then Swamp-Thing gets up and is like, hey, man, that's not a good vibe to be giving off. I'm gonna kill you. So, because that's how Man-Thing works, right? He wakes up, and he's like, yo, you got a lot of bad vibes, bro. You're dead. I'm gonna kill you with sulfuric acid, right? Sounds a real pleasant way to go. So, as they're going home, Man-Thing and Thog are fighting, like, legit behind him and, like, slowly walking to this city while these two are, going, head to head. And then finally, when Jennifer and Andrew notice that they are being pursued by the situation, Man-Thing gets, I almost said Swamp Thing, oh no. Man-Thing gets the upper hand, and he essentially drags Thog back to the swamp, and he picks him up and he slams him back into this portal, and he's like, go back to your home, baby. And Thog was like, but baby, no. And so he goes back to his home, and then the comic ends, and then we get another comic where Thing is doing that thing where he just stands in his swamp, and Thog's like, so yoink, Thog pulls him into his dimension, and in doing so, he changes Man-Thing into, Ted Salas again, so that he has this, like, conscious mind, whatever, and he's like, you're in my dimension now, so, welcome, right? Here's some hot chocolate. By the way, I have an offer for you. If you like being Ted Salas, I will give you the ability to be Ted Salas, but I want you to go back to your reality, and I want you to kill those two, that brother and sister that brought me to your dimension, because not only do they have no freaking business doing such a thing because I'm a powerful Nether Spawn, but also I just want to see them dead. So if you go kill them, you can stay like this forever. And Ted looks at him and he's like, joke's on you, guy. I've actually been like this the whole time, and this is an illusion. Pow! And so all of a sudden we see, boop, it is what it is. And Man-Thing essentially takes on Thog again and essentially kills him this time. So he ends it there, and that's where we're kind of stuck off. So then we have this, like, we've got a few comics with Jennifer and I almost said it again, Man-Thing, where Jennifer kind of has this not infatuation, but she kind of works with Man-Thing a lot. And she decides to kind of refine her magics and stuff like that. And I think maybe she's attracted to the idea that, not in a sexual way, but like an intrinsic, like, ooh, or I can learn from this magic being in this swamp. I'm gonna kind of operate out of this swamp. So she starts kind of helping Man-Thing when things come up, or starts refining her own magic kind of around there. So she does a lot of rituals and things like that to aid in the preventing of things crossing over. So Man-Thing's main job at this point, protector of the Nexus realities, his job is to stop things from crossing a portal from the swamp into the 616 reality. He can also manipulate things from other realities to change out things in the 616 reality, which is a big deal. There is another situation that I wanted to note, that we have Dakai the Enchanter, who actually comes out of the thing. He is one of the people, he's the person that's like, hey, this is how this works. He's stuck here doing this thing, and give me back the Tome of Zerana. You should have never had it. There's a demon invasion coming. Thank you very much. The way this works is somebody tries to break through, and then Man-Thing has to beat them in a hand-to-hand combat, and then boom, it's over. So yeah, I'm leaving, and since I came through, Man-Thing has to fight a monster called Mongol. Bye! And then he fights him and wins, because Mongol's essentially, he's just a demon with an axe, and axe does not work very good against never-ending, always able to heal plant life. So that is the notable events there. Next up is power level. And Marvel Strike Force Scopely doesn't care about power level, but on here on Frosty Features, we do. Now, the way that this works, if you are a multiversal threat, you can end all of reality. The entire multiverse can topple at your will. Universal means that you can end your universe, maybe hop on over to another universe and topple that one. Cosmic means you have power on the low end, that is on a planetary scale, being able to decimate things like small planetary bodies, all the way up to solar systems or galaxies with enough time and effort. Nuclear means you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, being able to level things like small cities or up to a small planetary body, once again, with enough time. Super Soldier means that you are beyond all human capability in every way. You are able to take out things like brick walls or city blocks with enough effort. City means that you are a power level similar to a human being that is trained to the absolute and utter peak of human ability. In Marvel Universe, we have a lot of our secret agents, our mercenaries, our ninjas, and things like that in this area. And then also we have Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that is spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and without the Undying team around him or some other fun little things, Greg, left to his own devices, is very, very weak and lonely and whatever. So theoretically, if I was out on a swamp tour and I wanted to feed the alligators, but Greg took all the food first, and we get in a little tussle, I, as a regular human being, could take Greg and throw Greg over the side and feed the alligators that way. And therefore, and then Man-Thing, not Swamp Thing, will jump out of the swamp, give me a high five, and we're all friends and buddies. So with that, Greg is equivalent to that of a regular human being, just for the sake of argument and due to undead Asgardian physiology. And in the case of Man-Thing, we have an incredibly powerful being. We have a being that has come into because he's not good or bad, right? He's not evil, or he's not a villain or a hero. He leans the hero side because he's there to protect. He's there to protect the reality. He's there to protect the Earth, the universe, the multiverse. But also he's not. He does not have a conscious like good or bad thing. He has no motives, right? He's a plant, right? He just exists, right? So that's very important in my argument to say that Man-Thing is a multiversal threat. He not only protects the Nexus of Realities, but has a pretty solid control over the Nexus of Realities and is pivotal in its operation. So very similar, we talked about in Frosty Features Kang, Kang's influence is that where it could topple the multiverse. Man-Thing's literal position is to keep the multiverse running. Or safe, or what have you. But like I said, he can also manipulate different universes to swap things into other universes and make that canon, right? Which is extraordinary power, right? So, just in general, the massive durability of the character. Now, once again, it ranges heavily on who writes him, but because of how little he shows up, and when he very much is brought in as an atom bomb move, right? He's like, in Avengers when they're like, well, we have, I have an army. It's like, we have a Hulk. In this situation, a lot of the time it's like, I have an army. It's like, we have a Man-Thing, right? So you got to be very, very careful with all of that kind of stuff. So, but there are situations where he gets knocked out, things like that. But in general, his actual power, his power is such that if he had influence, which he doesn't, because that's a big thing we always talk about. Maybe that's something I add to Frosty Features. His power is such in a way that if his influence mattered, he could topple the multiverse if he wanted to, which is kind of cool. And also, he's a cool character. Not only he doesn't have a personality and stuff like that, but he's one of the only ones where a writer's difference in opinion on how he operates, whatever, legitimately can just come from the fact that he's not going to start with the strongest attack. Why didn't he go Super Saiyan at the beginning of the fight, right? He's not operating like that. His being is pure reactionary, right? Which I find is just such an interesting concept. According to Scopely with this, I think it was a nice try. the first description, I think, yeah, the first description says that he's being tailed by one AIM member, and it's actually like a group of them and Ellen Brandt. But other than that, I really like their very exciting wording. They're wording like it would be like trying to sell a comic book. So I actually really appreciate these ones, due to the fact that they conflict just a little bit. I wanted to say nice try, not great, but the wording was pretty good, and I really enjoyed reading these ones. So hats off to Scopely for the description here. It's just they decided to release two, and they kind of conflicted a little bit, so I gave them a nice try. So that was Frosty Features Man-Thing. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments your favorite Man-Thing moments, or if I got anything wrong, I'd love to hear it. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe this here on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. As a reminder, I stream at the link above where we do Frosty Features live, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. And I hope that you all enjoyed this. I hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. Most importantly, stay cool.